What's going on, everybody? Eric here, and in this video we're going to be continuing our Security Plus Tidbit series with discussing open source and closed source software. Now, I know that when we hear open source, we automatically want to revert to thinking about open source intelligence. Now, that's something for a different time and falls under social engineering. But for this one, we're talking specifically about software. And we know that software is stuff that can be installed on a system or a device, and categorizing it under open source or closed source determines what kind of licensing we have for that particular software. So when we talk about open source, what do we mean? Well, it's not necessarily free for the public to use for whatever reason. It just means that it's free for the individual to use under the terms and license of that agreement of software. So for an example of this, we're talking about, let's say, Linux distributions. Because we know out there that you can get a Linux distribution of Ubuntu, download it straight from their website, put it on a disk or a thumbstick, and install it as an operating system at no cost. And that's the key behind open source right there, is that it's software that can be downloaded and used at no cost per the licensing agreement. So what about closed source? Well, when we mention closed source software, we're talking about stuff that is at cost or at a terms of conditions based on that license agreement that the software or manufacturer puts on that software. As an example of this in the operating system world, we want to look at Microsoft Windows. Microsoft Windows is a closed source software licensing agreement that we actually have to spend money in order to be able to utilize. Now, I know it comes on a lot of different computers that you buy straight out of the box, and that's not to be confused with open source. Even though you don't pay directly for the Microsoft Windows operating system on that, let's say, a computer we bought from Walmart, it doesn't necessarily mean that the software was open source. We still paid for it, or somebody did along the way, for that individual user to be able to utilize it. And when we talk about open source or closed source software suites that are out there, we can look at some examples of that too, whereas on the open source side, we have, let's say, Google Docs, where we can log in with our Google login, whatever browser we decide to use, and utilize stuff, let's say, like Google Docs, Google Sheets, etc., or even Gmail, at no cost to the individual user itself under the terms of licensing. Well, that's for like basic stuff. Now, there is a option to where you can upgrade for storage and stuff like that, and that's where we start to get into the nitty-gritty of licensing agreements, which is for way later on. Now, the closed source side of the software suites that would be comparable to that would be Microsoft Office. Again, you actually have to pay money for this use, and it may come with a system out of the store from Walmart if that's where we go. But at some point, somebody's going to pay to be able to utilize and install that software on an individual system per the licensing agreement, whether it be us or the actual store that put it on there for that marketing ploy. And regardless of whether it's open source or closed source, this all falls under the licensing agreement and copyright terms of use that we get in stuff like the acceptable use policy whenever we install a program. We commonly get programs that install and say, do you accept with the terms of use or agreement, acceptable use policy? It has many different names, but it's that end user license agreement term that we use inside of CompTIA Security Plus world and CompTIA altogether, the EULA, EULA, that we get the terms of definitions to whether our software is open source or closed source. And one is free to use generally, and the other one is pay to use generally. And those are just little things to keep in mind when we start going through our Security Plus examination. That's all I have with this one. Like, subscribe, tell your friends, follow along with us here on the channel, and send me ideas, comment below. Let me know if there's anything else that I need to cover in particular for the Security Plus exam or just in general as we make our way through cybersecurity, networking, and intro to digital forensics here in the future. Y'all take care.